Hey everybody, welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast, brought to you alongside the awesome guys at Coam. Welcome to episode 2 then of our mini-series all about culture. And once again, I am delighted to be joined by Roger, the founder of TBG Giants, and Georgia, the head of TBG Giants' OKR Culture Practice. Welcome guys.
Hey there.
So good to have you both with us again, even if there was a slight delayed reaction. If you've not listened to the first episode, highly recommend that you turn this one off now, go and make a cup of tea and put the first episode on first and sit back and enjoy that, because this one's going to lead on from that one. So it's cool to get that context first. So today then, episode 2 of this mini-series, we're going to be talking about psychological safety. We're going to be talking about what it is, why it's so important to success, and why it is absolutely fundamental for successful implementation of OKRs, and about really how to build traction with OKRs through improving your psychological safety. So I've got Georgia and Roger with me again, like I say. Let's dive in then. So psychological safety seems to be becoming a little bit of a kind of buzz phrase at the moment amongst organizations. But Georgia, if I can come to you on this question, what is it? What is psychological safety?
Sure, and I agree. It has become a very kind of current term, perhaps in light of where we're at culturally, globally, and the stuff that's been going on. And there are definitions out there, but I'll share one that comes from the 4 stages of psychological safety, because I think it's really clear. So psychological safety is a condition in which human beings feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo, all without fear of being embarrassed or marginalised or punished in some way. So I think even just reflecting on that definition, there are some very direct and tangible links with OKRs, just from that one definition. And the 4 stages of psychological safety was originated by Timothy Clark. And he also says what psychological safety means is that it shouldn't be expensive for us to be ourselves at work, that we shouldn't need to expend energy or have to put effort in, consciously or otherwise, trying to cover up who we are or not feel exposed or protect ourselves in some way, or not care or not feel upset about how others are behaving towards us. Because all of that energy, all of that effort is being diverted away from focus on achievement or performance, let alone innovation and growth.
So that's interesting. So we've got a definition there and a little bit more of a in practice description, I suppose. But I guess the difficult thing about this for organizations is we're all individuals, right? We're all unique. So surely we're not all going to react the same to how a culture is built within an organization. No,
we're not. We're going to react through the lens from which we perceive the world as an individual, and calibrate our sense of psychological safety. In fact, we're kind of doing it all the time, and a lot of that runs quite unconsciously for us. It's the fight, flight or freeze pattern that is quite automated in us. And when we're in an organisation or in a team or in a business, and a lot of stuff is very familiar, that gets dialed down. But new stuff, change, shifting circumstances will send us on a bit of an alert again. And it isn't a fixed state psychological safety. It's not like it's on or off. It's, there's kind of shades of grey and all the colours of the rainbow in between, not having any at all and having the highest level of it. So there's quite a lot of complexity in this, actually, to think about.
Yeah, so you've kind of touched there then that we have levels of psychological safety in our personal lives, in our work lives. Does this mean that the environment that we find ourselves living in, working in, how that changes and adapts around us plays an important role when it comes to psychological safety?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's partly because human beings react to psychological threats or perceived threats in the same way that we do to physical threats. So we're having a kind of fundamental automated experience based on our sense of how safe the environment that we are in is for us. So we're kind of constantly sensing, in a way, how psychologically safe we feel, and we're intrinsically designed to kind of protect that for ourselves. COVID's just an interesting example of the range of experience that people feel or felt, for example, at the end of lockdown when we could go out again. Some people were up for it and were, out and about all over the place safely, one would hope. Other people have really chosen to stay at home without any apparent medical need or health history need to do so. So, yes, it can really impact on our behaviour, the nature of the environment that we're in, and certainly organisationally.
That's really interesting. What can go wrong then when psychological safety isn't present for an individual and the team and within an organisation?
So lots, and that potentially depends on the level of psychological safety that either was there and changed or wasn't there in the first place. But we certainly can't access what it takes to grow and to innovate if we aren't able to challenge the status quo, as an example, or we don't feel safe to do that. Then people won't come forward and speak up. We can absolutely lose people's willingness to contribute, to put forward their ideas and opinions if they don't feel that is safe, or their thoughts will be valued or listened to in some way. So that means we can end up with very risk-averse behaviour, and people will withdraw their discretionary effort and focus on kind of keeping themselves safe and within their own comfort zone to protect themselves. So it can really have massive impact.
So we're starting to see why it's so important then, absolutely. So two of the elements of psychological safety that you've discussed and you've talked about there, Georgia, is the feeling safe to contribute and feeling safe to challenge the status quo, which I think is a really fascinating area for discovery, really. Roger, we advocate every day, with our clients and through the podcast and through everything else that we do, the use of OKRs for non-business as usual activities. Yeah. And we ask people to take those calculated risks, stretch their objectives, do all those things, show vulnerability in front of each other at check-ins, show when they're not quite, on track, where they need help. If psychological safety isn't present in an organization, can OKRs succeed?
No. Quite simply.
Right. Okay.
A bit loud.
That was a long question with a short answer, wasn't it?
So, but let me embellish that a little bit further. So you're absolutely right to say that, where people are required to stretch, to take, as you say, calculated, sensible risks, they need to feel safe enough to do that, because there's the chance that it might not work. And if they fear that if it doesn't work, they're going to get berated, penalised, held back, pay reduced or whatever, they're just going to play it safe. It's quite simple. That mechanism that Georgia was talking about, that is hardwired into us all, where we're constantly, scanning for that which may do us harm, in other words, threats, and also to some degree as well, that may be nice for us, that could be a reward. But this is a very, very primitive piece of wiring that we all have, and it's for most people, the majority of people, the scales are weighted more towards protecting us from threat than moving us towards reward. So if we detect that it is not safe, for instance, in a team check-in, to stick our hands up and say, actually, my confidence on hitting this key result by the end of the period is not quite as high as I'd like it to be. If we feel that is a dangerous thing for us to admit to, then the chances are we'll probably say, you know what, yep, it's on track, it's on track, it's on track, it's on track. You get to the end of the quarter and it's not delivered. And it's too late to do anything about it by that point. So this is why psychological safety is so important, particularly in those check-in conversations, because if you're talking about levels of confidence, that's your early warning system for the business. That's your early warning system to show, or rather to signal where there may be some bumps in the road ahead. And it gives you, if there's open and honest communication going on, it gives you the chance to course correct before you hit that bump. So that you can, in fact, actually get to the end of the road. In other words, the end of the quarter. So, yeah, psychological safety, absolutely critical. Absolutely critical.
And just to jump in there then, what is the problem for a business owner, let's say, having their employees wanting to play it safe?
Well, you won't get much in terms of innovation. You'll get mediocrity. Pretty much, you'll get the same old that you've probably had before. You need, if you particularly want to see growth, if you want to see new things tried, if you want to see innovation, people have to be feel safe. Well, feel willing enough to try and safe enough to fail in a controlled manner. So this isn't, this is what I call intelligent failure. Yeah. So, and we've always advocated using OKRs to test out ideas. That's how innovation works. That's how it happens. And but so long as there is the ability to learn from that failure and then demonstrate how we apply that learning the next time round, then that, I would always argue, is higher performance than just playing it safe and never even trying.
Okay, let me flip this for you then. If psychological safety is going to create a platform from which we can deliver high performance, can there be such a thing as being too psychologically safe and, results being taken, risks being taken left, right and centre, and really, starting to kind of go a bit too far the other way?
Sorry, go on, Georgia.
I was going to say, I technically it sounds like that's possible, but actually with challenger safety in place, people should be able to feel safe to say, hold on, that's too risky. I disagree. Yeah. So what I do think happens, and I've seen plenty of times, is we feel very comfortable with each other and we get on well and we've learned how to work together, but that can create groupthink. It can actually create arrogance, and there are plenty of organizational examples of where the business has become arrogant, that it holds the market position and it doesn't need to do anything else now. We can become blasé if we're not really aligned around the level of risk that we are prepared to take financially or in terms of resource allocation or whatever it may be. And if we're not sufficiently outward looking. But challenger safety should ensure that there is the space and the desire to hear those opposing views and kind of come back to a revised decision-making process.
Absolutely. Can I just illustrate that with a bit of a story, if I may? VW, Dieselgate, has cost them billions of dollars and is still costing them billions of dollars. The leader of the organization at the time when the strategy was put in place that actually led to Dieselgate was a gentleman called Ferdinand Piech, and he was known for having a rather abrasive style of leadership. Often used threats to get, as he put it, the best from people. And at the point of putting or shaping the strategy, which, like I say, ultimately led to Dieselgate, he made it very, very clear that he wanted VW to be the number one, or rather the largest car manufacturer in the world. And that meant beating Toyota, because Toyota were the largest at that point. And they couldn't do that unless they cracked the States. And VW, up to that point, apart from the Beetle, which was always popular in the States, had never been a big seller in the States. They'd always trailed behind the domestic makes. Now, the thing was, though, the engine technology which VW had, or certainly had majorly invested in, was diesel. And diesel wasn't a particularly popular fuel in the States. However, they were able to promote that from the emissions angle, that diesel was actually a much, much cleaner fuel for that market, and try to get in that way. However, that wasn't true. That wasn't true. And because he had mandated this had to be done beyond any other priority, in one respect, I say, I admire him for having that single point of vision, North Star. But the problem was, as you say, George, there was no Challenger safety available because people were frightened. And they came at this from the point of view of, we've got to do this no matter what. And actually, they got quite innovative and quite creative, but they ended up cutting corners in rather unproductive ways because they put these defeat devices into the software of vehicles that meant that they proved that the emissions were really low, which meant that they would be seen as a really popular choice or a really safe choice or a really clean choice, and that would get them market share and so on and so forth. So that's what led to these defeat devices being put on. When they're in test, they appeared really clean, but actually out on the road, they were dirtier than anyone ever thought. And that that was a failure of leadership at VW, well categorized. But it's a classic example of where the absence of that Challenger safety that you refer to, Georgia, actually led to an organization having to foot a bill for billions of dollars. And that's what potentially can happen if people don't feel safe enough. So to take your question about, can people go too far? Yes, they went too far and they really, really pushed very, very hard and they were ambitious. But in doing so, ultimately they fell short because at the end of the day, it ended up costing them, not to mention as well, the incredible amount of impact it's had on health as well, from an emissions point of view.
And actually, my understanding of that example, Roger, is that ultimately they broke the law.
They did, yes, exactly.
Bypassed the standard testing at whatever the emissions level were that was is US legislation. They lied. Yeah. As an organisation, they lied. There's no two ways about it. People were prepared to break the law rather than speak up. And that says a lot, doesn't it? They were actually prepared to endanger, and these are people who are scientists that understand the impact of, pollution in the environment. They were prepared to endanger people's lives rather than speak up. It's a very powerful example.
Koan is a purpose-built solution for managing your OKRs, helping your teams achieve their objectives, getting them aligned, and absolutely helping them stay engaged. Sharing spreadsheets simply doesn't scale when you're trying to grow a business. With Koan, you can scale OKRs across your entire company whilst keeping the teams motivated and moving in the right direction. Now, Lawrence, there's lots of things we love about Koan, but tell me one of yours.
So I've got to say, one of my favourite things is that Koan just allows you to have a bit of fun with the OKR process.
Yeah.
In series 2, I think it was episode 3 of this podcast, we actually spent about half an hour, 40 minutes talking about the importance of making OKRs fun for your team.
Yeah.
And Koan allows you to do that perfectly.
Yeah.
Even just things like adding a GIF to your reflections, add some real personality. And I think I probably waste far too much time each week looking for the perfect GIF, to be honest. But it allows that fun throughout the organisation, and that's something that's really important if you're going to keep people engaged.
You are known for having the best GIFs
Thank you very much.
In the team, definitely. So if you would like to find out more about how to make OKRs fun whilst using a great system, then pop along to Koan, that's KOAN.co OKR.com/giants, where you'll find also a great paper that we co-wrote with them on how to build accountability and collaboration using OKRs.
So, I mean, what an unbelievable example to show how important psychological safety is in an organisation. Georgia, how do we actually improve it?
Well, there's quite a lot involved, and it depends on where the team is and the organisation, what's their starting point. There are, in the model, the 4 stages of psychological safety. As we've said, there are kind of 4 stages, and it is a journey. It's not on or off or from none to challenger safety. And what's really key is that it's assessed at team level, because teams can vary greatly in their level of psychological safety dependent on the leadership style of their leader. And so leaders also need to be engaged in understanding how they're impacting psychological safety positively or not, as the case may be, and what needs to happen in terms of behaviour change being role modelled from the top, which is where we link back to kind of culture and values and behaviours and in action. And there are some really practical tips and tools that can be done at team level, but it does depend on what the starting point is.
Right. Okay, and I think we can start to come on to that a little bit more as well in the last episode, the 3rd episode of this mini series, where we're going to be talking about psychological safety a little bit more, and it being the secret ingredient and what those steps can be. You've mentioned there that it can differ greatly team by team, but are there any telltale signs to look out for when assessing that level of psychological safety within those teams?
Yeah, I think there are all sorts of practical things, and again, depending at what stage that team may be at. So, for example, in a as Roger's talked about, in a check-in or one of those kind of discussions and dialogues at the end of the quarter around discussing OKRs, if people aren't contributing, if they're not coming up with ideas, that would be a sign that there's something going on that's stopping them from doing so. And actually, that in some ways it's quite simple. There are 4 questions we can ask of people to assess where they're feeling that they are individually. How included do you feel? Do you feel welcome here? Do you feel welcome to be yourself here? How safe do you feel to learn? Because, again, linking back to OKRs, very often there's quite a lot of learning for people involved. It might be in the software, it might be in the process, it's in the language of how we frame OKRs and the ways in which we work together. So how safe people feel to learn is really important. And if we can't learn new stuff, actually, it's unlikely that we'll feel safe to contribute. And then, how safe do we feel to challenge the status quo without fear? Without fear of some kind of negative impact on us. So there are lots of telltale signs, and they'll show up in different ways depending on the level that the team is at. Yeah.
Roger, are there any other specific examples from the OKR world that you'd like just add in there as telltale signs?
Yeah, people not contributing at check-ins. It's as simple as that. When you've got the room is silent, or you just get a lot of nodding dogs who just go with whatever they think people, or particularly the manager, wants to hear. Those would be my so I guess the lack of challenge and the lack of curiosity on the part of team members. I'm curious as to how that's happened, and I'm curious as to how we could make it better. That absence of curiosity, I think, is also a telltale sign.
Yeah, I'd agree.
What do you think about Roger? This is mainly for you. When you see cases of disparity between the level of progress on an OKR and the level of confidence that OKR owner has put against the OKR.
So do you mean where perhaps there's high confidence but low progress?
Exactly, yeah. And low contribution as well, piggybacking on what you were saying.
So that would be a big red flag as far as I'm concerned. And I'd want to be drilling into it. If that hadn't been discussed already. I mean, the interesting thing is, I suppose, that if with that example, perhaps the key result owner was not feeling safe enough in the first place, I wonder whether they'd actually, mark that they were. That they had not made progress. Maybe they might even, be, I wouldn't say lying, but being creative. Perhaps to keep the spotlight off themselves. I mean, these things happen.
Yeah,
these things happen. People decide to try and play the system if they think it's going to help them or protect them. So stranger things.
But for me, that's a big telltale sign that you can see without having to look for people not verbalizing or not communicating. You can see that on the system in front of you.
Yeah, exactly.
I also think that it's possible that there wasn't sufficient level of contribution or challenge in the forming of the OKRs in the first place, and therefore people have ended up with something that they don't feel able to resolve.
Very good point.
And take forward. So then we, what happens is we dip into all the natural human behaviours of procrastination, avoidance, blaming others, finding reasons why I haven't done it or why we haven't done it, or simply saying it's just not going to work because the system isn't good enough or whatever it may be. So we're back into that piece around kind of resistance. And, resistance and psychological safety go hand in hand because we are programmed to protect ourselves in the main. And it shows up as resistance when we feel vulnerable or overexposed or at risk in some way from some form of threat. And those psychological threats are very subtle. It might just be that, the manager's disapproving or the look on their face, it, indicates disappointment. For some people, they'll almost do anything to avoid that, including lying.
I know this is final thoughts, Lawrence, but I've got another little story, if I may.
Oh, well, that can be one of our final thoughts, Roger. Go on.
Okay.
Another story to end on.
So this is a personal one going back to an organisation which I used to work in. I won't name any names, but I can remember there was a training program which was going to be delivered to a group of to a community of professionals. Let me just describe it as that. And these particular professionals had a particular discipline which they practiced. And it was my job to kind of produce the high-level design for this program and to commission the delivery of it. So I was involved in some initial piloting, but then I was going to be hands-off and the trainers would do it. And I remember that the pilot sessions were brutal, absolutely brutal, because really what the sessions were designed to do was they were designed to try and get people thinking a little bit more broadly, get people becoming a little bit more creative. The clients were demanding innovation in many ways, but it was very, very clear we had a community of people who were very, very entrenched in their views and very conservative in their ways. And they just sat there and they said, why should we? Why should we do this? Why should we bother? We're only going to get beaten back down, so why should we bother? And it was an incredibly negative and in some way self-defeating attitude. But you know what? When you listen to what had happened to them for years and years and years, you could kind of understand why. You could, because the culture in that particular part of the organisation had been quite toxic for a while. And they had learned to, you know what, it was safe for them to just stay in their box, keep their head down, and tread water until retirement. And that was it.
Yeah.
So I'd love to say that I was able to wave a magic wand and turn it around, but what actually came out of it was something more profound. The feedback, because I felt safe enough to feed back to senior management on this. So the good thing that did come out of it was that, I was speaking truth to power on this. Maybe it's why I didn't stay in the organisation. I don't know. but yeah, I went back and challenged on the behalf of this community as to what as to how they felt, and it was there were some shifts in practice that happened at a high level as a result of this program, which wasn't the intended consequence of the program, but it was a good consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Georgia. Any final thoughts from yourself?
Yeah, just in listening to that story from Roger, I'd say that is a golden opportunity. That is a brilliant starting point to begin to address what's actually going on for people. And that's the point. If you've got anything like that going on in your team or your organisation, there's any resemblance, come and talk to us. And it genuinely often does take an external input, facilitation, to create the environments in which both people can speak up freely and really express what's going on for them, and leadership can hear it. Because it's very often the case that somehow or another leadership, even if they're being told quite directly, they kind of can't hear it from their own people sometimes, because of the conditions around the lack of psychological safety that are there, because they're just as invested in protecting themselves as their colleagues and team members are.
Brilliant point. Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Golden nugget to end on. Georgia, Roger, thank you both so much for joining me again. Another fascinating discussion. Everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you have. Please do tune in for episode 3 of this mini-series, where we'll be digging into psychological safety a little bit more, and giving you some tips and tricks on really how to unlock it as a secret ingredient for building that healthy culture within your organisation. So make sure you come back for that. Let us know your thoughts on LinkedIn and Twitter. And until next time, this has been Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast, brought to you alongside the awesome guys at Coan. And we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Cheers, everyone. Bye.